Good evening, everybody, and welcome to On the Sports Lines. It is June 4th, 2020. We had plans of what we were going to do this week, and then came the past week, which has been crazy and has finally taken coronavirus off of the front pages. So, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, back on May 25th, George Floyd was brutally stomped on the neck by one police officer, with three police officers helping. He screamed, "I can't breathe," and unfortunately passed away soon after. There has been a lot about this. The three officers who helped have now been charged. And the lead officer has went from third-degree murder to second-degree murder. What has been most important of this is there has been protests all over the world. All 50 states have now had protests, and we have come up to a pretty much a trying time in everybody's lives, and we come almost to a crossroad where everybody needs to have an opinion, and everybody has had an opinion this past week. So we're going to weigh in on how sports is dealing with George Floyd and everything else. With me is Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait. As always, we will start with some opening statements, starting with
Anthony. You know what? We watched the George Floyd footage. It's horrific. It pretty much everything that Black America, like myself and so many others, have said for years about police brutality, but we now saw it with our own two eyes. It's almost like it was so horrific that now, if you were in denial over what was going on in our society, what has been, as far as systematic racism, it would be very hard to be in denial because everyone saw that footage. Everyone saw the police officer knee on George Floyd's neck. And do you realize that 8 minutes and 46 seconds is an eternity? We are sports fans. We feel like that's an eternity, and when you and to see the outcry, and it's not just from African Americans, not from Black America, but from everyone, from people from all walks of life, saying, enough. It's like, okay, maybe this could be a watershed moment. This could be a watershed moment that this very thing that Colin Kaepernick protested 4 years ago, the very thing that so many others, that Muhammad Ali, that Bill Russell, that the activists of the past used their platforms to speak out on. Things like LeBron James as well. Now it's like it's right in our face. And at a time in America where we're dealing with the worst economic situation since the Depression, a pandemic. And now it wasn't just George Floyd. You think about Breonna Taylor. You think about the young man in Georgia that was gunned down while going out for a jog. And now people are starting to see that being Black in America, it's an extra chore. It's tiring. And you saw my Instagram stories, the protests of literally outside my backyard. They have been, for the most part, peaceful. I want to put it out there that the protests have been peaceful. I don't want the looting that was going on, because those were the protests. I don't want that to take away from what the message has been and what should be going forward. But right now, if we're going to have any kind of change in this country, whether it be systematic racism, whether it be dealing with how the police are accountable for the actions moving forward, we cannot let the the depths of these young men and women go to waste. Not now. We can't let this continue. This cannot be another chapter in a never-ending book that's been going on for 400 years. If you're an African American, and in my case, African American, and my mother is Native American also. So we have to take this opportunity if we're going to move forward as far as change. Because if now, then whenever. And for the people out there that are saying that are not happy, that are uncomfortable with the protest, it's not about being comfortable. It's not about being comfortable. It's about having that uncomfortable conversation with your peers. Because right now, the one word that's been missing for a very long time is a compromise, a middle ground. And right now, we need to find that middle ground together, or we're not moving forward at all.
Yeah, I've been talking about this a lot to various people over the last week, 10 days. There's no way I can ever understand the experiences, Anthony, that you've had, or that Steve Ferguson or Pedro Hazel Jr. have had, or any other person of color in this city or country, even though I spent 20 years playing on a City League basketball team where 10 of my 12 teammates were African American, and I've been surrounded by people of color my whole life. I'm white, so my interactions with police have always been civil, respectful, and cordial. I have never feared them. However, I am Jewish, so I come from a people who have been persecuted for their religious and cultural beliefs throughout history, from the pharaohs to the Nazis. I've heard the stories from the generation that lived through the Nazi horrors. And it's through that prism that it's only through that prism that I can even remotely attempt to try to gain some perspective on what you and others have been through. I can say I understand things a lot better now than I did the last time the words "I can't breathe" were used when Eric Garner died in police custody, but we still have a long way to go. Our world has to change. There's no two ways about it. And if not now, when?
We have much more of a long way to go. We haven't learned anything even from
we've taken
when he got shot 41 times by police way back in the 90s. What we need to do is just take a little brevity for a second. First of all, there needs, like as Anthony just said, there needs to be a middle ground. Not between police and African Americans, because not all policemen are bad. I don't like my late father-in-law, my wife's father was a police person. I know police in my family, and what these four people did is not representative of what police are, not at all. And I'm not kind of downgrading what happened. I'm just letting you know that right now. And that's kind of something that is unfortunately kind of putting a stain on the police department. Does it need huge sweeping change? Yeah, kind of does. But it's really gotten to a point where we're kind of at a point of no return, and it would be nice to have a leader that actually can unite us, and we don't have that. And because of that, I've walked from Penn Station. I started working in the city again this week, and I walked from Penn Station to Bryant Park where I work, and all I see is boarded up stores and boarded up stores and boarded up stores, because there were even people who took advantage of the situation. And again, it's a side note, unfortunately, because if you're going to mention looting before mentioning this incident and the reason it happened, you are part of the problem.
Yeah, you're looking at it the wrong way.
Huge part of it. And that's kind of why it's one of the reasons why we're in this position right now, where we've had a sweeping reform of change, because you've seen protests for 10 days now about people that has just you've seen protests for 10 days now about just almost an unsolvable issue. What we are here to talk about, however, because we are qualified to talk about it, we'll get to James Dolan in a little bit, is we're here to talk about sports impact and really what's going on in the world of sports in terms of racism and all these other things. And yes, Vic Fangio, there is racism in sports. Please note that right now. And I want to start off by calling out somebody, Laura Ingraham, who has defended Drew Brees, who we'll get to in a moment, and has basically told LeBron James back in 2018 to shut up and dribble. There are known racists in the world, and guess what? That's one of them right there. And there have been other people who have said stupid things on social media this week. Buffalo Bills backing quarterback Jake Fromm mentioning a thing or two. And there have been some issues with that, but let's get to Drew Brees for a second, who, despite mentioning Black activism in the social media and the movement and recognizing it, he immediately went to the fact that he can't get anybody disrespecting the American flag. Yeah, that kind of caused a little bit of an issue, especially with teammates, both of his wide receivers, Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, speaking out. Brees apologized today, and a lot of people are still mad. Let's start with the opening comments of Brees with Jay.
Drew, his comments, the no disrespecting the flag thing. I mean, obviously, that set the discussion back 4 years. I mean, the blowback was huge, obviously, from all over. You talked about his teammates. LeBron James came down on him hard. Malcolm Jenkins is another one of his teammates who came down on him. And I was talking about this with my brother last night. I was trying to reconcile the quote, never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or country comments, which are ridiculously out of touch with what is happening right now, with the man who has given of himself beyond fully to the city of New Orleans, both on and off the field for 15 years. It just didn't seem like Brees to step in it like that. Yeah, okay, granted, he made a profuse apology, owned his ignorance, walked back to his comments as best he could, and recognized that he made, quote, comments that were insensitive and completely missed the mark on the issues we are facing right now as a country. They lacked awareness and any type of compassion or empathy, end quote. Does he have a ton of fence mending to do? 100%. But I agree with his former teammate, former Pro Bowl wide receiver Joe Horn, who did rush to Brees' defense, saying the quarterback's track record of work in the community should earn him the benefit of the doubt. And this is the quote that Horn made, and it's why I agree with him. Quote, people should not be throwing Drew Brees under the bus, and they definitely need to pump the brakes on labeling him a racist. People that are criticizing him, like LeBron James and other celebrities, don't know him. They need to check his resume. I love my race. I love New Orleans to death, but I know Drew Brees, and Drew is a good person. And until you have walked beside him and gotten to know him, his wife, and his family, you definitely have to give him a pass on this one. Allow Drew a chance to think about what he said and come back and make this right, and I know he will. And I'm inclined to agree with Horn. I'm inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt and let him make this right. A 15-second soundbite should not undo 15 years of integrity, loyal leadership, and community service. Yeah, look, guys, he's flat out wrong with what he said, and he's going to have to work real hard to, even get, kind of try and remove this stain on his reputation, his legacy. But hey, guys, even the good guys slip on the banana peel every now and then. Granted, it's the most heinous of banana peels you can step on in this day and age. But I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt.
It's a pretty slippery banana peel, by the way.
I'm not saying it's not.
You mentioned Joe Horn's quote, and you know what? And the reason why I can't agree with Joe Horn is because of Drew Brees' stature and the fact that he is one of the more prominent faces in not just the National Football League and all the sports. What he said, and I'll say this to myself, him saying that, I was offended. I was hurt.
I was too.
Without question. Because, because he made it about his grandfather's fighting for the flag. And I wish someone had told him, who else fought alongside your grandfathers? African Americans who fought for that same freedom, the same flag, the same rights that you, me, Steve Rabinowitz, all of us get to have. And you know what they came back to? They came back to a segregated South.
Yeah.
They got told to go sit in the back of the bus.
Yep.
You can't eat at this restaurant. They came back to a country where half of the population hated them because of their skin. And they didn't have the same opportunities as Drew Brees' grandparents. And I'm quite sure Brees' grandparents are the great people. To say that Drew Brees is racist, I think that's too far. Without question, I wouldn't label him that. I wouldn't label him that. I did have some friends who tried to go that far. I was not going to do that. However, he said this 4 years ago, and the difference between him saying it 4 years ago and this and now and yesterday is because when he said it 4 years ago, the narrative was hijacked, whether it was for political, for media purposes.
Yeah.
A protest about police brutality was turned into the national anthem protest. So when he said it 4 years ago and didn't apologize for it, it was basically playing into that narrative. But now 4 years later, with everything's going on in this country, with the protesting, you saw what happened to Mr. Floyd on video like everyone else. And to make such a brain-dead statement, to make the situation, granted, he was asked about football players possibly protesting, and I get that, but to make the situation about you is kind of part of the problem that we're having.
Agreed.
It's not about you.
100%.
When I hear someone say all lives matter, it's not saying Black Lives Matter more than anyone else. It's basically re-implying that, you know what, Black Lives Matter just as much. We matter as well as everyone else. You know, you want us to respect a flag that's not giving us the same rights and opportunities
100%.
at the end of the day, and that has to change.
Mm-hmm.
But how can that happen when Drew Brees, who's been playing around, black teammates since he can remember, and the point is, no one asking you to understand what it's like to be Black, but the lack of empathy, the lack of remorse in his comments, it hurt me, it hurt his teammates, and I've always held Drew Brees to a lot of respect, but me personally, I don't feel like his apology is no more than just lip service. If you want to prove it, then let me see your actions speak louder than your words, without question. And it's not about his track record. I get it. He has been very charitable with his time, his money, his energy. But you gotta understand this. You play for an NFL team in the deep South with a heavy African-American population who embraced you, who took you in as one of their own. How many Black kids in Louisiana has a Drew Brees jersey on? And to say that, it's kind of a slap in the face to them. I don't know how it's going to be about with his teammates. His teammates is one thing. They're professionals. Whether they sincerely accept his apology or not, they're going to do their jobs at the end of the day. But those people who packed the Superdome, who supported you since you came into New Orleans in 2005, those are the people you got to make it up to at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without question. Those are the people that you owe an apology to. Not just your teammates, not just sports fans, not just the National Football League, who, by the way, we'll all get into in a minute with their hypocrisy, without question. But what you did, what you said, look, my uncle served in Vietnam and came back sick. Last time I checked, he didn't come back to medical coverage. He didn't come back to a house or a job. My father served in the Army Reserve. I have relatives who served in the Army. I have friends who are police officers, good people, by the way. And that's why I say there are good people behind those bashes. But where's the accountability in that regard? And that's where the issue lies. Drew Brees, and shout out to Aaron Rodgers, who eloquently replied back and said that it was never about the flag, never has been, and never was, and never will be. But I feel like it was just such a tone-deaf moment. And even his apology, it feels like he still don't get it. And that's why I find a tough time giving him the benefit of the doubt, like Joe Horn did. Joe Horn knows him personally. He's a teammate. But at the same time, it shouldn't take a Ed Reed or Mark Ingram or a Michael Thomas or LeBron James or even Whoopi Goldberg, for that matter, to come down on you, and you know where you made a mistake and what you said was wrong. You saw this 4 years ago. This is not something new. And basically, the same league that blackball the one guy who peacefully protested police brutality now is suddenly backtracking, and you're going into the same, like you took the situation and made it about your beliefs as far as what the American flag is. And I'll tell you what, when I've gone to a lot of games, whether I've been a member of the press or as a fan, when I stand for the anthem, but you know what? There are 20,000 people. That anthem, that flag, that symbolism means differently to so many people in that very arena. And one of the things I always said was the melting pot that bring everyone together was sports. And for you to say that you're disrespecting the flag and how I see things is a slap in the face to the many African Americans, the Latinos, the Asian Americans who fought for this very country also, and did not have the same opportunities that your grandparents fought for. They may have his grandparents may have came back to a parade, but my uncle did not come back to that in Vietnam. He was spat on like so many of his colleagues because everyone hated the Vietnam War after a few years. We saw how bad it was becoming. So I'm sorry, but I cannot accept Drew Brees' apology. I don't speak for his teammates. I'm just speaking for myself here. I just feel like he's apologizing because of the backlash, not because he sincerely knows he made a mistake. And because he has teammates that he could easily talk to about the situation. It's not my job as an African American to educate you on the systematic racism that is going on. I can support you and you wanting to know. You can support me and wanting to make change. That's why I say there's got to be a middle ground, a compromise that has to be there moving forward.
Well, to be fair, everybody apologizes after the backlash because they get the backlash, because they say it and they realize that was
put my foot in my mouth.
Yeah. Let me just speak on this beforehand, and then I'll get to my final thoughts on this. I have friends on all sides of the aisle. I have friends who are in one spot or another spot. You have a right to your opinion. However, if your opinion is lambasted by other people, and yes, sometimes the right opinion is lambasted by more people, especially in this area, because we live in a very, very democratic state in most spots. Prepare yourself to get lambasted. And for Drew Brees, somebody who is such a public figure in New Orleans, who is somebody who people look up to, there were people who were kind of booing Drew Brees or not in New Orleans who were not happy with Brees' comments, and at a protest kind of chanted against him. And that's for somebody who brought to that city its first Super Bowl title ever. I think Brees is not a racist. I think Brees was just misguided with these comments. I think Brees said it at the wrong time. And you can't ever compare the sacrifice of people in the military at this moment. It was a tone-deaf comment, and it makes me think that all athletes should be walking with the PR person at all times, because eventually you're going to put your fucking foot in your mouth, especially if you don't have the same views as other people. And you don't have to have the same views as other people, but if you say that at a time when the nation is hot right now about civil rights and is in the position that it's in right now, and obviously it'll be a discussion that may go to the back burner in a week or two, but if you say it at this point, be prepared for what's coming for you. Now, let's move on to another NFL stance, as Anthony has alluded to, Colin Kaepernick has come up a ton of times this week because 4 years ago, he was one of the first people to really, really protest against police brutality by taking a knee. Something that has now become almost a worldwide trend where you see officers taking knees, you see protesters taking knees. And it's allowed people like Pete Carroll and Kyle Shanahan to say what Kaepernick did has really started a revolution, so to speak. And now we get to, let's talk about the NFL stance on this today. And oh yeah, back in 2016, and why we're in this position now with Colin Kaepernick. Anthony.
You know what? I think probably the most funniest thing I seen on this was members of the National Football League speaking out on this issue, and it is probably the most hypocritical thing I have seen, and I'm happy I'm clearly not the only one who has pointed this out. Because it's like the one guy who peacefully protested, and by the way, Nate Boyer, who is the veteran who gave Colin Kaepernick the idea of kneeling, he said when you kneel, it is to show respect for fallen soldiers, and he explained, and I've even seen this for myself, when someone is killed in the line of duty, the American flag is presented to the next of kin. The soldier kneels to present that flag. But it was the fact that 4 years ago, the National Football League, and matter of fact, America was a different situation as well, because we had a black president 4 years ago. We did see some progression as far as society was coming along, but the systematic racism was still there. We had saw what happened with Eric Garner, with Trayvon Martin in the past as well, just to name a few. And Colin Kaepernick peacefully protested. He explained that it was about police brutality and systematic racism. But we saw what the NFL did. They blackballed the man out of the league rather than perhaps being progressive and perhaps being on the front line as far as showing what peaceful protesting is all about. And even earlier this week, a former league executive basically came out and said what we all knew, that Colin Kaepernick protest is the reason why he's no longer in the league, and the owners listen to that small percentage of fan base that complain about it and pretty much pick their bottom line over what was right. Now you see 4 years later, and you're seeing statements from our team, the New York Giants, the Jets, which made me, I'm not even gonna lie, made me fall on my chair and laugh, because Woody Johnson is actually part of the Trump administration. And as much as I would try to leave that kind of politics out of it, look, we all know what's going on there. And you're seeing and you're seeing Pete Carroll come out and say we owe Colin Kaepernick. No, you owed him 4 years ago. Yeah. You owed him 2016. You owed him in 2017. And what did you do? You blackballed him. You came up with every excuse as to why he was no longer in the league, other than the most obvious one was that his protest made you look bad in the eyes of political individuals that you obviously supported, that you obviously donated campaign to. Shaq Khan, who is the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, penned a letter, and it was just like you could have saved your time and energy, because you were one of those prominent political donors 4 years ago. So it just makes, like I said, like the NFL coming out with statements about change is hypocritical, because it's like, you know what, you had your chance to take the forefront on change, and you know what you did? The one guy that you could have actually embraced. You could have actually made him discuss, reach out. You know what you did? You moved it to the side. You go out of your way to try to erase the fact that he was part of your league, like the 49ers tried to do a couple years ago by leaving him out of the Wall of Fame in Levi Stadium. I just think the NFL it's not but lip service right now.
Yeah, I wholeheartily agree with you, Anthony. I mean, the NFL, especially through the voice of Roger Goodell, I mean, to say that they fumbled their public statement in the wake of all of this, all I have to do to tell you how badly they fumbled it is I'll quote Kenny Stills' his response to the statement. His reply on social media was, "Save the bullshit," and that's pretty much the way a lot of people, a lot of the players, African American players who make up the predominant percentage of the NFL feel. But, with all that, I got to say I was happy to see former Pro Bowl defensive back and current NFL VP of Operations Troy Vincent speak out, telling his story, his own experiences, the lessons he unfortunately has to pass on to his son who plays football at Ohio State, about, talking about wanting a future where parents like him don't have to give the talk as a survival tactic. The fact that he's personally reached out to police commissioners, police chiefs, who have spoken about reform and have a desire for positive change. He's spoken to head coaches. He's in constant dialogue with the leaders from the Players Coalition, led by Malcolm Jenkins, Breeze's teammate at the Saints. And he's continuing to encourage ownership to hold community roundtables in their individual cities. He fully believes sports unifies people and can be an agent for change. And look, more power to him. And I hope he continues to empower others. But the needle is not truly going to be moved inside the NFL until the old white men, and it's a phrase you guys have heard me use ad infinitum when we talked about Kaepernick and other such situations in the NFL, until those old white men either get out of their own way, open themselves up to having those uncomfortable conversations, or just plain get out of the way. I don't know how the NFL is actually going to be as much of a force for change as we would like them to be as the biggest sport in America.
Well, yeah, you know what? And I'll piggyback on what you're saying. The National Football League haven't even accepted or even done anything about its own history of systematic racism. I mean, how many years have we had to hear about the notion of a black quarterback not being able to intellectually lead a team? Or how about the current league MVP Lamar Jackson and people telling him that he should change positions? How much of that had to do with race? Or the fact that a radio shot jock made a comment that the reason why he's so good with a play action pass is because the football blends in with his skin color. How ridiculous is that, for that matter? It was 2 weeks ago, we were just talking about how can the NFL fix the Rooney Rule. And I was calling it, you're basically bribing teams into having black coaches instead of them basically trying to own on their own merit. Like the league hasn't even done a good job of getting out of its own way as far as coaches, as far as ownership. Like you said, the all white boys club, white men club, I would say. And I think that's what the biggest divide in where. And I know somebody will bring it out, Vic Fangio, saying that there's no racism. Maybe from his perspective, number one. But you know what? In a locker room, maybe everybody gets together because you want to win games and you're professionals. But it's a little different when you go up the hierarchy, the ladder, when it comes to the coaches, when it comes to ownership. Are there any owners outside of Shad Khan? There are only so many head coaches in the National Football League. So it's like, okay, look, you want to talk about change, you want to clean up your own backyard right now because there's a lot of garbage there that's kind of stinking up the neighborhood, and we can all smell it from a mile away. So that's why I said the NFL is a lot of lip service, and right now their track record speaks for itself, and it's not a good one.
Let's compare this to what the NBA has done with community outreach.
Oh, yeah, night and day.
They especially in the Adam Silver era. And I never thought we went, I mean, obviously in the 90s, it was probably not as much of a topic, but I think the NFL has gotten less inclusionary in the Roger Goodell era, and I almost think it's taken many steps backwards, especially with all of the Kaepernick stuff that has happened over the past few years. Let me bring you, and we'll talk about the Minnesota Vikings in a little while when we kind of close this show, but their statement on the NFL, your statement said nothing.
Yeah.
Let the players know what you're actually doing. We know what silence means, but let me read the first part of that statement. Your league is built on black athletes. That's why we talked about the coaching hires, not about not too many African Americans or head coaches. When
PMs.
probably, yeah, and assistant coaches too. When about 30 to 40% of, I think it's even more, I don't know the official statistics, but a good amount of your league are black athletes.
Majority of the league.
You need to have a voice for black athletes, and pretty much right now, the NFL doesn't. However, white athletes have actually spoken up on this issue. We mentioned Aaron Rodgers before, but the statements of athletes like Joe Burrow and J.J. Watt has really resonated. Jay, talk about what that's meant this week.
Yeah, it's funny, guys. I remarked to several people, over the last few days since it's all come to a head, that what's happening is very much like what happened in the 60s with the civil rights movement, the marches, the protests, the riots, the police brutality. The only difference is the backdrop. The 60s had Vietnam, 2020 has coronavirus, both being a simultaneous additional cause of unrest. But what has been noticeably different, and Rabbi, you alluded to it, and thank you for the easy setup, is that, and what's been very different from the 60s is that white people, and especially white athletes, have spoken up in unprecedented numbers. I mean, Carson Wentz, Tom Brady were, among those supporting the call for police reform, by the Players Coalition, a group of NFL players. There, for those of you who don't know, and if you don't know, you haven't been paying attention. The Players Coalition is a group of NFL players that works on social justice initiative and is largely focused on criminal justice reform. And you had a number of white NHL players speaking at length with The Athletic about how Floyd's death has inspired them to address racism. You brought up two names, Rabbi, and Joe Burrow, who's a rookie, who's yet to play it down in the NFL, and most rookies keep their mouth shut, especially if they haven't, because they haven't paid their dues yet. But he obviously, and credit to him beyond measure, that he could not stay silent. He was one of the first ones to speak out. His quote was, "Black community, they have been unheard for too long. Open your ears, listen and speak. This isn't politics. This is human rights." And I could not give the kid more credit and more respect. Yes, Rabbi, it's one of your LSU boys. But what it is to me is it's J.J. Watt who really stands out to me. I mean, his first public comment condemning George Floyd's murder was pretty damn powerful. And the quote is, "I've seen the video and I think it's disgusting. I think there's no explanation for it. To me, it doesn't make any sense. I just don't see how a man in handcuffs on the ground who is clearly detained and clearly in distress, I don't understand how that situation can't be remedied in a way that doesn't end in his death. I think that it needs to be addressed strongly, obviously, and I just don't see how that situation makes any sense whatsoever. And I think that anybody who saw the video, anybody who, I just don't know how you can defend it. I mean, it's terrible. It's extremely different to watch, and it's upsetting. So I don't understand it. But his follow-up to that, and this is, this to me is even more powerful, and I think this really nails it in terms of how this can no longer just be a person of color issue. Quote, "Silence is unacceptable. I spoke on the murder of George Floyd last week, but realized that my comments may not have made their way to Instagram, Facebook, and I do not want the absence of those words to imply my silence on this subject. I personally believe that a social media post can only accomplish so much. Listening, learning, understanding, and asking accomplishes much more. When I first saw the video of George Floyd's murder, I was disgusted and upset. In no simple terms, George Floyd should be alive right now. There were many
customers make their own rules. Let's talk data. Only Xfinity Mobile lets you.
I'll tell you what.
What is
one
that?
thing.
Where's that coming? Hang on, I'm not done yet, guys.
Yeah, that's the back of my.
Hang on, let me finish this though. Let me finish this. Let me finish this. George Floyd should be alive right now. There were many ways in which the situation could have been remedied, all of which would have prevented his. I never had to feel that fear in my life. I have never had to experience a situation where I felt threatened simply because of the color of my skin. I can't sit here and pretend to know what that feels like, but I can understand and acknowledge that it's wrong and that nobody should ever feel discriminated against because of the color of their skin. Racism is a problem and silence won't solve it. I certainly don't have the answers, nor do I pretend to, but I do intend to listen, learn, understand, and ask how I can help. And I got to tell you, for a white person in general and for a very visible white athlete to come out like that, need more people doing that, whether you are an average person, just an average citizen, or you are someone who is constantly in the public view. That, to me, is where it needs to be at.
You know what? We were talking about athletes speaking out. I gotta give a shout out to Coco Gauff. We forget that she's only 16 years old, and she spoke out about how she was 8 when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and now she's 16 and we're still talking about unarmed black men being murdered in America. And she said that one of the things, and I'm just paraphrasing, she said that I'm 16, so I'm not old enough to vote. You're voting for my future. And that resonated with me because you think about it, the people who are protesters, for the most part, are over the age of 18 or at that age of voting. And, you know, for someone who is 16, who's in the public eye, and we've seen her basically take on Summer Tennis Best, who are almost 20 years her senior. I think that's pretty potent. She said that you can't love black culture and be silent on something like this. And I agree with her to an extent, because it's like, because it does feel like to some people that, how can you love my culture but you don't love me enough as a person to feel that I should be your equal as well? And I felt like that, like for someone who's 16 and is able to point that out, I thought that was very eloquent. And it speaks of, you know, someone who is very knowledgeable beyond her years. So, you know, when you hear that and then you compare what Drew Brees said, and it's like, you're almost 40 and you still don't get it. I think that's just that's the perfect example of one end of the spectrum as far as the other. And you mentioned some of the more prominent white athletes. Pete Alonso, the New York Mets, also spoke out of.
Don't steal that from me. I got
No. I just brought it up. I'll let you close the thought out about it. But he also spoke out prominently about it. And I remember a month ago, I talked about how Pete Alonso was a future face of New York. But I'll let you finish that statement off.
Yeah, when we get to baseball, I will. You know, it's funny, you know, you guys talk, Anthony, your quote about how can you, you know, appreciate black culture but not appreciate me. It kind of reminded me of kind of like a small monologue Cedric the Entertainer had in a movie that you guys may not know. It's called Be Cool.
No, I love that movie, actually.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. You get the reference. Okay.
George
Rabbi,
Floyd, actually.
I don't know if you know the movie or not, but it's about the music business. And Cedric is saying this is his response to a Russian gangster, obviously a white guy, calling him the N-word. And his response is, quote, "Have you lost your mind? I mean, how is it you can disrespect a man's ethnicity when you know we influence nearly every facet of white America, from our music to our style of dress, not to mention your basic imitation of our sense of cool, walk, talk, dress, mannerisms. We enrich your very existence, all the while contributing to the gross national product through our achievements in corporate America." I mean, he kind of, you remember, Anthony, he goes on to say, you know, you should just say, "Thank you, man," and go on about your way. I'm like, I don't get that, but this is what I mean. I was talking about earlier, guys, about the double standard that racists apply. You're okay as long as you're entertaining me. Both in the same real world? Nah. And I don't get that. I just don't.
Yeah.
And thank God. Rabbi.
Yeah. So, by the way, it was me with the voice before. That was kind of the Zoom wrap-up music for you two, and apparently you both missed the cue. So let's talk about the NHL for a second, and this is going to tie into a bunch of different things. So, and for the first time ever in the history of my life, and probably on this show, I'm going to mention something that was talked about on First Take. So, JT Brown and Evander Kane are two of probably not too many African-American hockey players. JT Brown is the only NHL player to protest racism during the anthem. And they talked about how people should speak up, like Tom Brady and Sidney Crosby, who haven't. And I think we should encourage more white athletes who are of the voices of their league to do so. But I'm going to quote on this. We need so many more athletes that don't look like me speaking out about this. He said, having the same amount of outrage that I have inside and using that to voice their opinion, to voice their frustration, because that's the way it's going to change. So that's a little bit of hockey's take on it. Let's circle back to basketball for a second. There has been a multitude of support for George Floyd, who Steven Jackson, former NBA star, it's one of his best friends. Yes. And Jackson's been emotional all week. Many teams have had great responses to this. Let's talk about the Knicks. Okay. Wording, there is going to be foul language in here. Viewer discretion is advised. Dolan didn't speak out on this issue, and it was revealed on Tuesday that an internal memo was sent to the organization to not speak out on this issue because they don't understand we don't understand the situation. They're not qualified to speak on it. Even though you sent a current fucking player of yours in Dennis Smith Jr. was down in Dallas over the weekend protesting these killings. So James Dolan doesn't want to speak and then issued an apology statement that said, we here at MSG promote diversity and inclusion. Not I support this. MSG supports this. So you know what James Dolan kind of does himself? He issues, and he has the gravity of the statement to talk about Spike Lee, has to talk about Charles Oakley, and defame both of them. And guess what? He does it easily. And he also talked about Richard Jefferson, too. God forbid we defame another black man. And God forbid we defame another black man to give you a good sense of PR. I am ashamed of what James Dolan did, and many people will say this is a cop-out to how shitty the Knicks are because they are a shitty organization on the court, and now we know there's a shitty organization off the court as well. I am embarrassed by what the lack of talk from James Dolan. I am, and again, by the way, this is a James Dolan who's JD and the Straight Shot Band recorded a song about Trayvon Martin in concert many, many years ago to probably profit off of that, and his band sucks, so God forbid he actually can ever do something like that. I am ashamed at the lack of comment that the Knicks made. They're one of only two organizations who didn't make one as of Tuesday, and I think James Dolan, the Knicks will never be anywhere as a human organization or as a team until Dolan steps down. You are a privileged white boy who is definitely not qualified to speak on this, but when everybody else is speaking on this, follow the crowd, James.
Anthony, go ahead. You weigh in first on this.
You know what? This is so Dolan. And I say that in the most logical sense. Keep in mind, in 2014, when the Donald Sterling situation was going on, he released a statement saying that he condemned racism. I know, right? I know. I see your face, Jay. But keep this in mind, too. The rookie of the New York Rangers, Keandre Miller, who was the victim of racial slurs during a Zoom Q&A just, a couple months ago.
A month ago.
Like, so it was just like, okay, you have a player that is playing for the hockey team you played for, a victim of racial slurs. By the way, there was a history of hockey players. You got PK Subban, you got Kevin Weeks, who have had to deal with racism in that regard. Excuse me. And then you have for Dolan, you get into spats with Spike Lee, who is only one of the most prominent film directors and a very prominent activist, and a noted lifelong Knicks fan, probably the only fan at this point who still pays season ticket prices to come to Madison Square Garden. You piss him off. You get into it with Charles Oakley. You have no problem releasing statements and criticizing fans who tell you to sell the team. But something like this, where you have a current player protesting. By the way, shout out to Ennis Canada. Shout out to Klay Thompson, Steph Curry. Shout out to all these players who have been part of the protest. Trey Young, another one,
Brown,
that has made themselves available, who are using their platform to get this situation out. You are owner of one of the NBA's most storied franchises, and it's in typical Dolan fashion. And I don't know, because he's looking at his stock portfolio. By the way, we all know his father handed him the New York Knicks. It's like he didn't do anything to earn ownership of any of the teams that Madison Square Garden. It is in so typical Dolan fashion that not only did he drop the ball and not saying anything, he dropped the ball and explaining why he didn't say anything. So it's like only James Dolan can find a way to double dribble in an email. This is James Dolan. It doesn't even surprise me anymore. But I would think when you have a rookie prospect and a highly regarded one who is going to be playing in your building at some point, who is the victim of racial slurs, I would think you would have a little sympathy in the fact that someone that you're going to be signing the checks to can have a little more a little empathy for from the guy that he's going to be eventually calling his boss.
Yeah, and Anthony and Rabbi, you talked about the Knicks being one of the only NBA teams to not make their own statement. Because it's Dolan, the Rangers did not make a statement. So, and here's the thing about this, and as you guys put it, it's very Dolan. It's typical of him. The hatred that New York fans have for that man is directly proportional to the love they have for the teams, whether it's the Rangers or the Knicks, that he is in control of. There are so many diehard fans of those teams who love those teams to death, but cannot stand for the life of them this man. And look, if James Dolan doesn't want to make a statement, he doesn't have to. But to not let the faces of his actual teams, Leon Rose, who just came on board as the new front office face of the Knicks, talk about a perfect opportunity for this guy to be, James, you don't want to be the public face because you don't want to say anything? Then let the guys who are running your operations say something, even if, however you let them do it, let them say something. Because in this day and age, as we've been talking about, you can't stay silent. You can't. Leon, you want to, because here's the other thing about it. The way you so totally bollocksed up this whole thing from jump and then your follow-up, do you really think any prominent NBA free agents who spurned you last year are going to want to come play now when, the next offseason? No, this is just further proof. You shot yourself in the foot when all you had to do was shut up, not say anything, and say, hey, guys, I don't want to make a statement, but, if you guys feel comfortable making a statement on behalf of the Knicks or on behalf of the Rangers, go ahead. I may want to look at it first, but, go ahead. And the fact that he's so socially inept and so just flat out stupid that he can't even make the leap to that simple decision as a CEO is just like I said, it's typical Dolan.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Knicks, and you look for somebody who could have spoken on the Rangers. You just brought John Davidson back to the organization.
There you go.
If there was anyone who was more prominent that is more prominently tied to the New York Rangers, whether it was as a goalie as he was, or as a commentator, which John Davis said, yeah, have a visible face, and to prevent anybody from any of these organizations from speaking out, like I said, it's James Dolan in a nutshell.
Yeah, and you cannot take that road. You can't go down that road in this city, in the situation we are in right now. You just can't.
Yeah, and don't forget Tony DeAngelo, one of my favorite Rangers this season, has been suspended before for a slur directed at a teammate and is not really one of the voices to say anything on this. Let me close out with this. By the way, the other team, shockingly, that didn't make a statement up to that point were the Spurs.
Well,
just saw that up.
Well,
and no, because Popovich, I know that. Let me finish. Okay. Greg Popovich, who is a very known activist out there, that's why I said it was surprising. Greg Popovich, who is a very known activist out there, has said before that we live in a racist country, and we sure do. And one person I like to congratulate on this is one of the most outspoken NBA coaches and one of the best NBA coaches, Steve Kerr, who mentioned that when these killings occur, we tweet, we write letters, we make videos demanding accountability, we protest, and we vow to change hearts and minds so that our young men can run through the streets without fear. And soon after, we see another officer kill a black person, usually a man, and usually without consequence. Where we wonder, is the accountability allegedly so important when it comes to arresting, prosecuting, and incarcerating young people of color? So Steve Kerr, who has been very outspoken about a lot of political things, knows exactly what he's talking about, is one of the best coaches out there when it comes to making a statement, which the Knicks.
And one of the best human beings in all of sports.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, without question.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best human beings in sports. And again, James Dolan is one of the worst human beings in sports. All right. So we've mentioned the NHL, the NFL, the NBA. Now let's talk about baseball, who have made, not really so many comments on this. Jay?
Yeah, and this is the thing. Major League Baseball celebrates every April 15th to mark the anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the color line in baseball. And that day is supposed to remind us of baseball's place in the fabric of America. This is the national pastime, after all. It's marked our progress as a nation, a society, a culture, or at least that's the way the story is told, right? The league's official website gets flooded with stories every year about the history that was made in 1947. Quote, then and there, one of the recent stories stated, the modern civil rights movement began in America. Now, here's the thing. We all know Jackie triumphed despite systemic racism, the same systemic racism that we are seeing right now in this country, that many who are not affected by it are still uncomfortable talking about. And yet Major League Baseball made no public statement at all. There was an internal memo. You love these guys with their internal memos saying, quote, zero tolerance for racism and the racial injustice.
Well, I had two internal memos that were both saying
and continues to be prevalent in America. But the memo stayed internal. Why? In these times where we've said this multiple times tonight, staying silent is tantamount to denial of the issue or an unwillingness to acknowledge it. I got to say, thankfully, some of the players have stepped up and spoken out. And this goes against the grain because traditionally baseball does not want its players speaking out the way the NBA lets its, NBA says to its players, go ahead and please do. Baseball says, shh. But, Jack Flaherty has spoken out. Lucas Giolito has spoken out. And Anthony alluded to it earlier. Pete Alonso of our own New York Mets. And this is the one I really cheered when I read about this. The Polar Bear posted on Instagram on Tuesday with the caption, #Blackout Tuesday, in a show of solidarity for Black Lives Matter. And almost immediately, someone responded by saying, all lives matter. Now, Alonso wasn't having any of that. Quote, get out of here with that ignorance. Of course, everybody's life matters, but we're focusing on the widespread racism in this country right now. The question is, why does the Black Lives Matter movement bother you enough to have to say all lives matter? Spot on, Pete. And then someone said something about cops getting killed in the streets defending protesters, to which Alonso replied, and I'm paraphrasing here, It's an amazing concept that you can be against the systemic racism in the country and fight for something to change and see the good in people like the cops that are out there actually protecting and serving. Again, spot on. Now, Alonzo said, like J.J. Watt and all the others, that while he would never know what it feels like to be discriminated against because of the color of his skin, he would fight for and be an ally to those who do know what it's like. We need more and more white people and white athletes to follow that. Baseball needs more players like Pee Wee Reese, who in 1947 refused to join several of his teammates in signing a petition stating they would not play with Jackie because he was African American. The Dodger captain, now he's a Southerner from Louisville, Kentucky, stood up when standing up wasn't easy and said, no, this is wrong. He chose to lead. Baseball, of all the sports, because of Jackie Robinson and the way they celebrate him, should be out in front of this, leading the way, even if it is not easy. The fact that they are not, to paraphrase the Athletics' Mark Carrick, is an abdication of baseball's standing as a social institution.
You know, I just agree with everything you said, Jay. Pete Alonso being outspoken, and yes, and as far as Major League Baseball, they really didn't speak out about protests 4 years ago. You think about it. It was I remember the Oakland Athletics who kneeled before the national anthem, and that was the only time you saw that in baseball. Because and it's funny because it's looked at as a matter of pastime, but you look at the percentage of African Americans playing currently in Major League Baseball have declined over the years. And I always felt like baseball hasn't done enough to reach out to the Black community as far as maybe about maybe developing the game, maybe building more playgrounds, maybe building more baseball fields to make the game of baseball accessible in those communities. I know I grew up in Brownsville section of Brooklyn. We basically had basketball courts. So what do you think, me as a kid growing up, is going to play most of the time? Basketball. You know, because one, it's easy for me to play. I can play by myself. But more importantly, when I turn on TV, I see more of someone who looks like me in the NBA than in, say, the National Hockey League or Major League Baseball. So you see that influence in itself also. But I always felt like the same energy that they put in to get prospects in the Latin America countries, like, you know, you could do even try to do a better job of doing that here, because you think about the percentage of baseball players in the 90s compared to now, it's a big drop off.
Yeah.
You know, you talk about the average fan in Major League Baseball is much older than the average fan in football. That's in basketball.
NBA.
So you see right there in itself, Major League Baseball has an issue, not just reaching out to the younger demographic, but reaching out to the demographic that make up African Americans, that make up the African American community. Yeah. And it's like, you know what, they haven't done a good job in, I would say, the last 10, 15, maybe the last 20 years, really, of making the game accessible to that kids may want to play baseball. They may want to go to college on an athletic scholarship to play college baseball, but you don't have that accessibility. I mean, a kid could go to high school and play football. There aren't too many New York City high schools that offer baseball teams. So that's another thing in itself. At least I can speak from, going to a public school here in New York, that, like I said, Major League Baseball really haven't done a great job of trying to grow its game in its own backyard. And it's like, yeah, you celebrate Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, but right now you're not building on the legacy he built. Yeah. Like when I walk in the City Field, I walk through the Jackie Robinson Rotunda without question. And it's like, and it's funny to me that I walk into a rotunda named after a man who broke the color barrier, but there aren't too many players that's African American that's playing in the game I'm attending right now. So, like I said, Major League Baseball has an issue that it really needs to address.
And this would have been a perfect opportunity for them to kill two birds with one stone, address that issue while, as you said, building on the legacy of 1947. And the fact that they just have been mum's the word is just sad.
It's typical. Not sad. It's typical for a sport that we mentioned the NBA's outreach on this, and that's kind of why the NBA is the second most popular sport in the world right now, and not baseball, because never adapts with the modern times. Let me finish with this, and it kind of ties everything together in baseball. Torrey Hunter is a very famous player who played for the Twins, Angels, and Tigers. He went on ESPN radio earlier today and said he had a no-trade clause built into every contract that would prevent him from being sent to Boston. You know why?
Most racist city in Major League Baseball.
That he has been called the N-word in Boston 100 times.
Remember Adam Jones as well.
That's exactly what I was just about to say. Adam Jones is the
last to integrate.
Yes.
It's
yes, I know. This is why I'm actually speaking about it right now. Yes, Adam Jones, racist taunts, had peanuts thrown at him while playing in Fenway Park in 2017. And Tom Yawkey, very prominent figure in the Red Sox, and they just renamed Yawkey Way in 2018. Last team to integrate, they didn't integrate until 1959. I don't want to act like I'm targeting the city of Boston right now, but that kind of it just makes the point specifically on why the MLB needs to get with the times. All right. Speaking of getting with the times, the NCAA also issued a statement on this. And if you talk about a league that kind of exploits black athletes, Anthony, the NCAA is kind of it.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, like how the NCAA will put out a broad statement, but it's like you're also the same organization that is trying that fought so hard to prevent your players, mostly black athletes, from basically making money off their own likeness while you're raking in millions of dollars in TV contracts, and Lord knows how much money they get from March Madness every March, not of course excluding this year.
Millions.
Yeah. So it's just like even the individual institutions, because I think that's what it comes down to. I haven't really heard, maybe I've missed it, maybe you guys might have picked up on it. I haven't really heard too many college coaches maybe speaking out, and maybe, and like I said,
you mentioned that because there was actually, and I'm pulling it up right now, there was actually a story, when was it? Yesterday in The Athletic, and the headline is, "It's time we ruffled some feathers, why college coaches have to do something." Even though there's not as many African-American football or basketball coaches, in Division I, but guys like, Jeff Capel are speaking out. Guys like, Rob Lanier, guys like, Kim English. These are guys who are coaches, assistant coaches, who are coming out and talking about their experiences dealing with racism, whether it's, just in their communities, with the police, golf, places where they played golf. And it's just, they realize, and one of the coaches actually said, and this is a quote, and it's a great one, it's going to, and it's similar to something that we've said earlier, considering, it's going to take people who don't look like us to assist us. I've done Coaches versus Cancer, the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS, the bracelets for Sandy Hook. What I tweeted, it's to coaches. Man, you have generational wealth from kids who have the same complexion as George Floyd. Your grandkids' can eat because a kid who looks like George Floyd can shoot a basketball, run with a football. These kids need you more than ever. It's the only way change is going to be provoked. What do you want me to do? Do something,
Yeah, and also... Yeah, and also I think about this too. Like if you are a parent and a coach comes to visit you, and if you go to the house of a black family, I'm quite sure one of the questions are going to come up: can you keep my child safe?
Yeah.
Because right now that's a prominent thing. Because if I'm sending my kid my son, my daughter to your university, and never mind the athletics or the academics, can you keep them in one piece?
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure that's a question that a lot of coaches, when they do their recruiting, have to answer without question. But also, and also a great deal of silence in the college coaches. I wonder if they just, I wonder how much just the athletic directors and even boosters are playing a part of that too, because you understand, athletic directors, the boosters, the money that goes into these colleges. Maybe they don't want to ruffle the wrong people, but you know what? You're supposed to ruffle. I'll take a quote from Batman Begins, but we're quoting movies tonight. But I'll take a from Batman Begins, and it's about one of the gangsters. Batman said, "You rattled his cage." And he's a man who rattles cages. Well, apparently you got to rattle some cages for change.
Yeah.
And here's the thing with college is that a lot of these coaches have gotten their millions of dollars and their big contracts off the back of the black student athletes. Mm-hmm. So it's like, so the silence, in the most part, outside of an NCAA statement, which feels a little awkward or strange, when you are also preventing these students from making a living, in most cases, it seems a little wishy-washy, just as bizarre as what we talked about the NFL.
Yeah, it's kind of unreasonable and almost impossible to ask just the black coaches to carry, the burden of being the outspoken voices on this issue. Think about the power conferences in college basketball. The ACC, the American Big East, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, or Pac-12. There are only 17 coaches that are African-American among those 87 schools. And NCAA numbers from 2019 reveal that only 41 of all Division I schools were led by a black president or chancellor, and just 51 athletic departments. And considering the difference in scale between the NCAA and the NFL, talk about needing a Rooney Rule, guys. The NCAA is in some ways just as bad. And the thing that, what can these guys do? The one thing that all the coaches have to do, and obviously, you have to make opportunities for these kids, not just in basketball, but opportunities in life. Because we all know that part of what's going on here and part of what is at the heart of this is just overall lack of opportunity, be it education, be it employment, be it anything. African Americans are at a disadvantage. And if you want to start improving things between black and white, start improving things for African Americans. Put them, give them the same opportunities the rest of us have. Find ways to make those opportunities that white people take for granted, that give them to African Americans as well. It's just, that's part of it. There is no equal footing. And until we get more equal footing in more areas of our society, we're going to be right where we are now.
We are definitely going to be right where we are now. Now, let me take this into two different categories when we talk about how coaches have responded. Let's talk about the coaches who are uncomfortable talking about this topic, and then you could be like Mike Krzyzewski and still not make a public statement, even though you can count probably in the triple digits how many black athletes loved Mike Krzyzewski. You could talk about Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney, and Ed Orgeron, who issued, I would say, half-hearted comments about the issue. I mean, again, it's uncomfortable for them because they're in predominantly white areas, and so you want to speak. And I think college coaches are probably the ones who should most speak up on this.
Yes,
because they hold the future of lots of black athletes in their hands, and most importantly, they are paid by the state. So people who are paid by the state should be making comments about the state because they are usually the highest paid people in the state. Let me actually give some credit before we move on to Lincoln Riley, who had talked about typing Black Lives Matter. did that. Mark Turgeon in Maryland quoted human rights activist Desmond Tutu and mentioned, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the sides of the oppressor. Oppressor, really? Iowa basketball coach Fran McCaffrey said systematic racial justice demands change. And I will, before head coaches even spoke, I will tie it up with this. Penn State's James Franklin, who is the only Black football coach in the top 25, posted a passionate message calling the deaths of Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery a symptom of a larger problem. And in moments like this, silence is deafening indifference. This has been a very hard discussion to talk about, but a very necessary one. So let's talk about Minneapolis's reaction to this. A lot of pro sports teams really reacted quickly, and the Minnesota Vikings and Minnesota Golden Gophers both said they will not accept the help of the Minnesota Police Department after what has been a very black mark for the Minnesota Police Department, and rightfully so. Yeah. And the Minnesota Vikings have definitely stepped up in this whole ordeal. Let's talk about that for a quick second to wrap it up.
I got to say, when I heard that the university was no longer going to use cops to provide security at their sporting events, I was like, wow, that's saying something. That's an indictment right there, and here's the thing. Minneapolis, it's amazing how different the experience is. I mean, they're like any other major city in the country. The experience you have growing up there is different based on the color of your skin. There's Tony Jones, who writes for The Athletic. He covers the Utah Jazz, so he's in Salt Lake City, which, talk about being a minority. But he spent, a lot of his formative years as a child in Minneapolis. And this is the quote that kind of resonated with me from his piece. On one hand, the need for sports, for basketball and baseball, and others to return is more prevalent than ever. It's the language that ties us together in a large part as a country. On the other hand, the undercurrent of systematic racism has become too overt to ignore. In that sense, I'm glad sports isn't here to serve as a deodorant for the real issue. And I replayed that over and over in my head. And yeah, you know what? If sports was going on, we would not be talking about it in the same vein, because all of the athletes who are speaking up and speaking out and risking contracting the coronavirus to go to protests, they would be in the middle of their jobs, other than really the NFL. The NHL and the NBA would be in their playoffs. The Major League Baseball would be a month and 6 weeks, 12 weeks into its season or whatever. So they would be more focused on their work as it would be, than speaking out like they are. So in a sense, because we don't have sports to use as a deodorant to kind of cover up this stench that's emanating right now, in a way, as much as we may want sports back, it's kind of a good thing at the moment. For this particular moment in history, it's kind of good that they're not.
Yeah, and and by the way, shout out to members of the Minnesota Vikings, who the team canceled their virtual meetings and ended the day so that players can attend George Floyd's memorial this afternoon. There were several players, more prominently Kyle Rudolph and Adam Thielen, who was in attendance. So a big shout out to them. You think about Minneapolis, and I've always wanted to go there. I've always wanted to take a vacation there, taking a Twins game. And from what I've always heard that it was one of the most diverse cities.
Yes.
In the United States. So when you saw people protesting when it started a week ago, it wasn't just Black Americans. It was Black Americans. It was white. there were, Asians, there were Indian, there were Latino, there was, you name it, because the Twin Cities had that diversity, much like here in New York and much like some other cities that are around the country. Hell, much like Toronto, Ontario in Canada, that's a very diverse city. But I feel it's very prominent that you see schools cutting off their contracts with the Minneapolis police, and it says a lot of what has been going on with that police force for many years. When it is not the first time that they have been in the center of some kind of police brutality or some kind of issue as far as among its ranks. Even the officer who was involved had 17 complaints of excessive force. I mean, I'm sorry if I made two or three instances where someone complained about me doing my job. I don't think I would have one. But this is why I talked early on about accountability and the fact that there has been a system and red tape put in place that has prevented police officers like the officers that were involved in George Floyd's death of being held accountable for their actions. And that has been, that is why, and this is not to quote LeBron, this is why he kneeled. And this is why you are seeing it now. But yeah, one of the caveats of this pandemic is the fact that it has exposed so much of what is wrong with our society and what this country is. In a nutshell, we're seeing record number of unemployment, but we're seeing Wall Street rebound. We're seeing these corporations still making money, but you have millions of people out of work. There's something wrong with the have and have-nots in that regard. You are seeing police officers, and I pointed out to the protests right here by the Barclays Center, where they were, in some cases, becoming the agitators and instigating incidents with protesters who were there to peacefully protest, risking contracting the coronavirus in their own right. Keep this in mind, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So you're seeing that. But here's the thing, if sports was going on, if life was normal the way it was back in February, back in January, hell, back to March 10th, when we had our on the Sports Line meeting, we were talking about the college basketball special, and I talked about this. The night it seemed like everything changed, I was in the middle of Madison Square Garden watching the open of the Big East tournament. And the first thing I thought to myself was, I need to go home, because I have family members who have compromised health systems that I can't afford them to get sick. And I would not be able to sleep well if I got sick and I passed it on to them or someone else. I would never be able to rest of myself with that. But the caveat to this pandemic is that it is exposed so much to that if sports was around, we can't turn the channel. There's nothing to turn the channel to. So now you're seeing what has happened to Breonna Taylor. You are seeing what's happened to the young man in Georgia who went out for a job, something that his family said he loved to do all the time. That was part of his life. He was an athlete. You're seeing what happened to George Floyd. You're seeing the years and years of this happening. You're going back to 1992, Rodney King. Remember this? We talking about the LA riots in 1992. I was in elementary school when that happened. Amadou Diallo, who lived in New York, who was shot 41 times, and all he had in his hand was his wallet. You think about all the years and years, but now there's nothing to change your town. There's nothing to distract you from. There's nothing to tune out the real world, because now it's in front of us. And you can't deny what's going on now, because it's right there. There's nothing to take away to put you into some ease or in denial. And I think that's one of the like I said, one of the strangest things about this pandemic is that it is exposed so much ugly that is wrong with America for all of us, and how things are so different 4 years ago when Kaepernick kneeled has to now, whereas there's no flag, there's no patriotism you can hide behind anymore. Now you see it for your own two eyes. And now it's like, this is the time we have to come together with some kind of middle ground because, and I just say this, we don't go anywhere as individuals if we don't go anywhere together. I think that's, and I don't know if I even made that saying correctly.
I know exactly what you meant. I mean, essentially, it's the saying, a house divided cannot stand. This country has been divided for the last 4 years, largely due to that person that the rabbi mentioned.
It's divided a little bit longer than that, but I think, it's been accentuated.
But what I'm saying is that whereas before 2016, 2016 and further back, what we're seeing now that is unavoidable, you can't not see it. Back then it was an undercurrent, and sports was a way to kind of like keep it as an undercurrent. It didn't have the voice it has now because someone in a certain house that went dark this week out of people are protesting outside my front gate, has kind of given those people enough confidence to speak louder than they may have before. But now you're seeing that come to a head. You can no longer not see what's going on because it's no longer an undercurrent. It's all up in everybody's face, and ever more so because everybody has a phone and everybody is filming everything. And I don't know how that officer can literally look at the people, the bystanders who are filming him, and still have this look of basically, I'm not concerned, I don't even care, this person isn't even human to me, look on his face, even knowing that he's being filmed. But you know what, if this is what it takes, and sometimes you gotta break some eggs to make an omelet, we need to start breaking a few more eggs. And the fact that sports is not there to cover all of this up and kind of give us the illusion that we've made some progress from Eric Garner, from Trayvon Martin, from Ferguson, that we've, this is the proof that, not as much progress as you even remotely hoped we may have even attempted to make.
Shout out, by the way, to Ferguson, who just finally elected a black mayor, by the way. So in the beginning of Anthony's...
Black female mayor, by the way.
Yes. At the beginning of Anthony's little soliloquy that he had spoken, he had mentioned about never going to Minneapolis. I have. I've been to a Twins game. It was a very nice experience. It was probably... What you see in the winter is not what you see in the summer. It's actually probably one of the best towns that I have been to, and especially in the metropolitan area. And I actually am very saddened. I love the Mall of America, by the way. I'm very saddened by what has happened in that area. And I'm very glad that they were like the first ones to speak about this. But as said by the Vikings when they were the first team in the NFL to release a statement on the killing, everyone in the community deserves the right to feel protected and safe. And as of right now, with all of the stuff that has happened with George Floyd, I don't know if that's possible. Anyway, guys, this has been a very lively discussion, but unfortunately, we need to call it a night. For Jay,
I know before we wrap it up, I hate to cut you off, but Steven Jackson was holding George Floyd's daughter over his shoulders, and he asked her, what did daddy do? His daughter said, change the world. And I really hope that comes true for all of us. I really do.
I do too. And, I will end it with this, Rabbi. It's my final thought. It's something Barack Obama's been talking about. There's two different types of work that need to be done here. You have the immediate and the visceral work that's being done with the protests and all of these people, black and white, speaking out. But there's also the long work that needs to be done. The people who are in charge of the criminal justice system in your local areas are all elected. Your mayor, your judges, your district attorneys, they are all elected officials. If you do not feel that they are doing what it needs to be done to keep your community safe, go vote them out.
And again, as I said before, we need to feel protected and safe. And as of right now, I don't know if that's possible with all of the things that have happened in America. And again, I respect all sides of the argument. I listen to all sides of the argument, but you do need to realize that we do have a big problem in this country, and it's not just COVID. For Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, my name is Stephen Rabinowitz. Thank you for sitting through what has been a needful and we meant to make an uncomfortable discussion for the last 90 minutes. We are live always on Thursday nights at 9 o'clock on Facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines. You can see this show again tomorrow on YouTube.com/OnTheSportsLines. And I will do the Twitter this week at ONTH Sports Lines. Next Thursday, we will hopefully get back to a regularly scheduled program and do what we were planning to do this week. We'll talk about the NBA. It's back, baby, on July 31st, and we'll talk about the NBA's best postseason games of all time. The NBA in the summer just seems weird if it's not Summer League. Anyway, my name is Stephen Rabinowitz. Good night.
Good night, everyone.